Hi guys, my name's Chetan Bhatt. I'm a Maths and Science tutor. I studied biology at Imperial College London, geophysics at UCL, and then I've been exploring around the world for different kinds of plants, especially in the neotropics in South America, Venezuela, Amazon. And one of the most interesting places that I want to introduce you to today is the Paramo. Paramo is a high altitude landscape in South America. Most of it's in Colombia, and it's the most rapidly evolving landscape in the world, meaning that there's been an explosion of lineages over the last 100,000 years, much more than anywhere else in the world, much more than Hawaii and Chapada, which is in Brazil, which are the other two really, really like kind of crazy places for plant evolution. And not only do we have a lot of fun plants to look at, well, really that's it. We have a lot of fun plants to look at, and we can wonder why and how this has come to be. That's the idea of this talk. So I just want to open it up by introducing you to the Paramo. And so where is it? Where is it exactly? So on this image you can see Colombia, that's where we are, and then you see Central America in the form of Panama, and north of Panama is the Atlantic Ocean, south of it is the Pacific Ocean. Colombia is the only South American country with both oceans on its shores, and that creates a really interesting climate systems, right? Because the Atlantic, the Caribbean in this case, is quite a sheltered piece of sea, and then the Pacific is a huge body of water. And so we zoom in, and what we can see, oh, by the way, going back to the Colombia image, there are three mountain ranges. If you can look from the south of Colombia, you'll see like there are ridges that form, and one goes into Venezuela, and the other one goes kind of north into Colombia, the other one kind of slides also north. They all travel north, but in different parts of the country. There are three ridges. And on one of the ridges, the one that heads off to Venezuela, that's where we are. That's where we went, basically. These ecosystems, these Paramo ecosystems, they exist in all of these parts, all the way from like Ecuador, south of Colombia, into Venezuela, and they're all very different to each other. But the particular one that we went to was near Venezuela, and there's a reason for this, and we'll get to the reason. But first, have a look at the landscape here. It's craggy. You can see that it's not flat. There's a lot of valleys, there's a lot of peaks, and this is going to become important in trying to explain why exactly we see the diversity of plants that we do, and why it's so rapidly evolving in this part of the world. You can see the words Laguna Negra, and that's exactly where we went to. Really cool place if you get a chance to go. And next to it, there's a Paramo called Oseta, and if you get a chance to go there once in your life, it's really stunning. So, what do the mountains look like? They are, in this part, a kind of sandstone. This all used to be underwater, and as the Andes lifted, it lifted up these layers of rock, which are sandstone. The black on these rocks is actually probably not what you think, unless you think that it's bacteria, because it's bacteria. There's colonies of bacteria that are colonizing the face of these rocks, and it makes them black, which is really cool. It's an environment which has many layers, and we're going to see this over here in this image. You can see a big valley. Laguna Negra is like the little patch of water in there. You can see like maybe there's it's like 600-700 meters between the lake and the peak of the mountains, which is quite significant. And yeah, so I want you to imagine now that it's a few tens of thousands of years ago, and there are glaciers, which means that the ice would be much lower down, and the plants would be forced to be inside the valley. And so you can imagine how right now, without the presence of glaciers, the plants are on different peaks, right? They might not be inside that valley because it's too warm, but they are on the peak where we're standing and we're taking the photo in this case, and the one opposite. That's a separation. They can't really cross that unless there's a bird flying or something like that. But these plants that we're going to be interested in, and I'm going to show you the images of in a second, they drop their seeds only like 3 centimeters from where they're at. So pretty much they create these little patches. They don't really spread by birds or by mammals walking. So essentially, if there's a valley that's too warm in between, that's like 400-500 meters down, they can't cross, and now they're isolated. And isolation is very, very important, but so is bringing them together at points in time to transfer genetics and then isolating them again. And it's this kind of constant process which which is going to be part of our reasoning for how it's become so diverse. But we'll get to that. It's kind of almost like an intro to that idea. But the main thing is to acknowledge that whilst it looks like mountains, which they are, but whilst we might only think of them as mountains, what you could also think of them as, let's focus, is islands, inland islands. The peaks of these mountains are not connected to another peak of another mountain, and so they become these isolated islands inland, which occasionally connect when the glaciers come into play. Very, very interesting. So the next image is just of the people that I brought up, my family, who are very unsuspecting. They were very kind of nice to say, let's go to this place, and then they got their shoes stuck in the mud, and it's a lot of fun. Then the image after is me being very, very happy with one of these plants. They're very special, but this is the kind of plant that we're going to be looking at. They're called Espelicia, or frailejones, which means like an old monk in Spanish, because of their, I'm not sure why they think of these things as monks. Maybe because of the crown on top of a monk's head, and this looks like a crown. I don't know, but they are related. They are a form of Asteraceae. They are related to sunflowers. Maybe I can jump across to a full-on image somewhere here where you can really make sense of that. Look at this. So I hope you can recognize that they're very sunflowery. And so, what is it about Asteraceae, this family that sunflowers and daisies belong to, that makes them so distinct? These flowers, the petals, and you can walk up to a sunflower maybe in the summer, or walk up to a daisy, I don't know, somewhere in your garden, and notice that the petals are not part of the main flower. It's within, if you look into the dark patch between the petals, you'll see many, many more flowers. So in fact, in Asteraceae, the significant thing is that the flower is a composite flower. It's a flower of many flowers, which is really crazy and cool. But, you know, whilst I show you this image, and this is the plant that we're focusing on, there's a huge radiation here of mosses, ferns, heathers, like trees, everything that you can think of. Well, not everything that you can think of, but there are many lineages which have like really exploded here. The most kind of curious are these ones, these Espelicia. So this group of plants is, there's a lot of species, about like 140 species. 80 of them are in Colombia, another 50 in Venezuela, in a smaller area, because let's face it, like the countries in terms of biology are a bit arbitrary. The plants don't care whether they're in Venezuela or whether they're in Colombia. They're just growing on a mountain. So the part of the mountain which is smaller in Venezuela has 55, and then the bigger area which is in Colombia has about 80. And the Venezuelan types, which you can see on the left, all these branching types, the right of this diagram, all these branching kind of crazy forms. Not only is there a greater concentration in Venezuela, but there's also a greater diversity of like morphology, of forms. In Colombia, there are more species because there's more space, but the forms are less complex. They're more or less these straight stems with the crown on top. Some have the flower, the leaves, like on the trunk, as you can see on the image on the far left, and some don't, as you can see on the second image from the left. In fact, that one is very interesting. It's nearby Bogota, and it's 10 meters tall, and hopefully we'll go out to kind of see it soon. But bear in mind, what I'm giving you as information here is to begin to paint the picture that you need to begin to understand where this radiation came from, where it started, what's the evolutionary dynamic. And that is made a bit more obvious here. I'll zoom into it. So if you look at this, we have the number of species mapped out, right? And so on the right-hand side, you have all the different forms that you find in Venezuela and the north of Colombia. There are about 50 odd species, and 72 odd in the area next door. What we think when we see, so first of all, notice how the mountain ranges do look kind of more island-like in this kind of in this way of imaging it. And if you look, so if you look at this, it says Cordillera Occidental, and then Central, and then Oriental. It has these three names next to the mountains. Those gaps in between are huge valleys full of jungle and rainforest. So what's on one peak is not going to make it to another peak unless a glacier forms and forces all the vegetation to lower altitude. And the jungle will just become smaller and it would go towards the coast, right, where it's all more flat. And it's in those times that the plant can make it across to the other mountain, and then, you know, just like islands, it can make it like instead of the sea, it's just a valley, and then they make it across the other mountain. And as you can imagine, then that the further and further away you get from the source, the fewer and fewer types of plants are going to be there, because not all of them are going to make it across, have the time or have the ability. So we see that here. The thinking is that the origin of the diversity, the origin of the radiation of Espelicia anyway, let's get this diagram back up like that, is in fact in Venezuela. It's in the red parts. Well, not all of the red parts. The red part, the area that says Mérida. You can see it in the, see, Cordillera de Mérida, so over there. From there is where you get the highest diversity, the highest concentration of species, the highest forms of that. So there's a whole bunch of lineages. I'll show it to you in a second. All the lineages are pretty much in Venezuela, and 2 or 3 have entered Colombia, and those 2 or 3 have diversified into more species, but the forms are less complex. So the origin is Venezuela, and then they moved over to Colombia, and slowly you see less and less diverse, lower and lower diversity as you go further and further away from that source of Venezuela. These are all of the kinds of lineages. And so you've got the Colombian clade, the Venezuelan clade. You can see it's much bigger. And you don't need to get into the names so much, but each one of those refers to a form you've just seen, right? With Espelicia being the one on the far left, the one that we're going to see today, and then the other ones, being of other names, right? Interesting to note, and I haven't put it here, but though these groups were made a little while ago, and people were looking at things visually, they're looking at how the plant looks and saying, oh well, if this plant looks this way and this plant looks this way, they must be related. But what we've discovered by looking at the genetics of these plants is that even if they look similar, they might not have had the same ancestor. And so a lot of these clades, a lot of these lineages are actually more complex when we look at them genetically, and there could be a change in the naming in time to come as we get more sophisticated with that. It's kind of like the frontier of phylogenetics when it comes to these plants, these radiations. So to map out what we said, you can see here the movement of the plants, the idea. I'll zoom into it a bit further. And Venezuela is the source, and then they come down into Colombia and Ecuador. Now, a little bit of a break from these plants and into another set of plants which grow right by them. And because, like I said, the landscape over there is hyper diverse, right? Ooh, what am I doing? That's better. So there's many things that have diversified, especially because I'll show you later, there are like images of moss. It's a very hyper humid landscape, very high altitude. The moss inside that is created kind of like a mat into which lots of different things can grow. And some things are big, like the Espelicia, and some things are like this. This is a lupus, and it's a kind of legume. It's kind of related to beans and lentils and peas. As you can tell by its leaf structure. And there are a few different kinds of this plant over there, but some of them have like these big spikes of flowers that are like 6 feet tall, immense. These ones are more about like 2 or 3 feet tall. The spikes and the flowers, really bright, really beautiful. There's a lot of interesting stuff. Just everywhere you look, there's just something happening, something growing, something stuck in something else, which is just flowering and really interesting. And so the middle of this image, of course, there's is where the path's been cut. But you can see the mosses that I was referring to. You can see the pristine habitat around the path on the left and the right, and it's matted with like little shrubby trees. And a huge diversity of other kinds of plants too. The trees actually increase in their kind of diversity and density at lower altitudes. We'll get to that in a second. But the big one, and I want you to notice now, I want you to try and spot, right? We said that there's 88 species in Colombia. In this one patch alone, there are a bunch of... So in each patch of Colombia, in each Paramo, in each island, if you will, of the mountains, there are a number of different species. So if you go to one part, it won't be the same as if you go to the other part, and that can be just kilometers, right? Because all you need to do is cross a valley, and then you're into another island system. So try and pick out how many species you can see in these images. And so look, so this is of course the famous one. It's big. It's like 8 feet tall, which in meters is about 2.5. And it has these, it's not spiky, it's very, very velvety, it's very furry. And this is part of the incredible adaptation of these plants because, as you can imagine, in these extremely high altitudes, we're talking about 3,000 to 4,000 meters above sea level. There is not much atmosphere compared to at sea level, and so the radiation is very, very strong. The plants have to protect themselves from extremely bright sun. At the same time, they have to protect themselves from not protect, but like kind of adapt to the extreme humidity that's in this environment. It's extremely moist. If you go back to the map quickly, what you'll see from this image. Right, so you'll see on this image that where the star is, that's Bogota, that's the capital, that's in the mountains. If you look south of Bogota, you see a big green mat. That's the Amazon rainforest. And there are 2 warm bodies of water as well, including the Caribbean, which is not so far away. So there's a lot of moisture being pumped into this, into the mainland of Colombia. And that moisture gets driven up the mountains, and it condenses and it rains. It's very, very humid. It's a very, very humid place. So it's kind of strange, right? Extreme humidity and also extreme sunlight and radiation. And so they have to develop this furriness to protect themselves. They also have to, if you look at the trunk of this one, it's full of leaves, right? And the leaves are there to protect the core of the tree from frost. Because it will reach -1, -2 at times. It can get frosty, which is incredible. The kind of number of climates that these plants have to deal with. These images show you how tall they get, how majestic they look. And now notice this. You see this one? The shape of the leaves, the shape of the flowers, the way that they droop, they're golden in color. There are different species to the one that we were just seeing. They grow lower to the ground. And then again here, can you spot where it is? I'll give you a few seconds. So we've discussed 2 species already. There's a third one here. Isn't it amazing that there are this many kinds of this crazy plant in just one space? And they all emerged very, very recently. So if you look in the foreground, you can see that these ones in the foreground are spiky, but look at the leaves. They're daisy-like. They're small and daisy-like. And compare that to this, right? Quite the difference. So this is another version of the last one that we saw. Big velvety flowers. And here we have small daisy-like flowers. They kind of spread out a bit as well. And then, of course, this one. These ones here have... what's this image? Okay, that's the last one. These ones here are white, and they've got tall, almost like doggy ear, fluffy, floppy leaves, and really, really beautiful. Sorry, I thought I had another image of those. So I'll just go back to this one so you can appreciate it, and I'll zoom into it over here so you can appreciate this image a bit. Also notice the ground. I mean, this is part of the radiation, the way that the moss has covered the ground, and you have this immense like variety of life that's growing in the heathers and all sorts of things. So here's a landscape where you've got pretty much everything going on at the same time. It's pretty wild, and and here's another which kind of shows you just what it's like to be there. A lot of moss. Through the moss, you've got all sorts of like shrubs and different things growing, and it can be very very misty. It can be extremely misty indeed. You couldn't see sometimes your own hand because it got that foggy, but it will clear as well. This is because of the of the gusts of wind bringing in a lot of moisture from the Amazon and places like that, and then of course the gust passes and then it clears up and it gets cloudy again. Here's another image of just to give you a feel of what it's like to be there, to walk around there. The kinds of frelejones on the floor over here are related to the daisy-like ones we just saw. Again, another close-up of moss. I found this to be quite like kind of pretty because you had this almost perfect garden inside a bit of well, cow pat, yes. But look at the plants around and the diversity of things growing inside the moss, including this thing, which is a snake's tongue fern. It's a kind of fern, which is very unusual. You also get this. You see the green patch in this picture. There's like kind of like a bright. Oh no, not. Well, there's a bright green and yellow, and then behind it, there's kind of this concealed dark green patch. Those plants there are like plastic, and as you can imagine, that's a defense against that extreme radiation from the sun. But it's very interesting. And I think the higher the altitude you go, the more those plants dominate. Because it's easier for them. And so I thought I'd bring you down now to the lake. We're coming to the end of this one, but there's a lot of different plants that we haven't touched on that I'll probably get into another little chat like this. So this is going back down to the lake. You can see here it's very different. It's a lot of trees, a lot of shrubby trees. It's still the Paramo. These trees look shrubby, but they're extremely diverse. And inside them, you got a lot of weird things growing in this kind of really wet, humid environment, including this strange thing, which is actually a lichen and is fruiting bodies, but it looks very alien. And so in this environment, within the trees, I think we'll get into that next time to show you the kind of the bright flowers and the interesting plants. And there's a few other talks that I have in mind as well about radiations of other kinds of plants. Maybe we also go to Venezuela and explore the diversity of carnivorous plants over there, up on another set of inland islands. Yep, I think it'll be very, very interesting. By the way, carnivorous plants are plants that eat animals, small animals, but animals nonetheless. And so, yeah, hopefully you found that interesting, you found that enlightening. I'm going to add in some further reading, like if you want to read around it underneath this, some scientific papers where I got the information from, which kind of expands out on the more kind of technical aspects of this. If you got any questions, of course, write in. I mean, yeah, because that would be very, very interesting to chat. And yep, hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it informative, and thanks for watching.